Trump trapped. Could Iran's massive response slip out of his control? The confident assertions of quick and decisive victory that emanated from Washington and Tel Aviv just days ago are colliding with a reality that should have been predictable to anyone who studied Iranian preparations over the past 4 decades. As Iranian missiles continue to strike targets across the Middle East, as regional allies find themselves under bombardment they explicitly requested to avoid, as oil markets spike toward levels that threaten global economic stability, a troubling question is emerging. Has Donald Trump walked into a trap of his own making, initiating a conflict whose escalation he cannot control? The evidence accumulating hour by hour suggests that Iran's response is not the desperate flailing of a wounded regime, but the methodical implementation of contingency plans developed over decades specifically for this moment. And those plans appear designed not merely to survive American attack, but to impose costs so severe that the attacker is forced to reconsider the entire enterprise. Hey everyone, I'm Michael Harris, geopolitical and military analyst, and you're watching my channel. What I'm about to share with you examines the growing signs that Iran's response to the American-Israeli assault is exceeding anything Washington anticipated and may be spiraling beyond Trump's ability to manage. The confident predictions of a war lasting days are giving way to the reality of regional conflagration with no clear endpoint. Before we analyze how this situation developed and where it might lead, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment with your thoughts as we go through this together, and share this video with everyone who needs to understand that wars of choice rarely proceed according to the aggressor's script. Now let's examine the evidence that Trump may have trapped himself in a conflict he cannot win. The scale of Iran's retaliatory response has shattered the assumptions underlying American planning. Within hours of the initial assault, Iranian missiles were falling not only on Israel, but on virtually every nation in the region hosting American military installations. The United Arab Emirates received more than 300 missiles, actually exceeding the number initially fired at Israel. Qatar, home to Al Udeid Air Base and the headquarters of Central Command, received approximately 65 missiles. Bahrain, where the Fifth Fleet maintains its headquarters, received approximately 35. Explosions have been heard in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Even Oman, which attempted to broker a last-minute diplomatic solution, found itself targeted. Missiles were fired toward Cyprus, bringing the conflict to Europe's doorstep. A tanker was hit in the Persian Gulf, demonstrating Iranian capability to disrupt the maritime traffic that carries 20% of global oil exports. This is not the response of a regime on the verge of collapse. This is the systematic implementation of a doctrine that Iranian strategists developed over decades. If Iran is attacked, the entire region burns. The fundamental miscalculation underlying Trump's decision to launch this assault was the assumption that American military superiority would translate into rapid Iranian capitulation. This assumption ignored everything we know about Iranian strategic culture, Iranian preparations, and Iranian determination to maintain independence regardless of cost. Iran has spent 47 years preparing for exactly this confrontation. The underground missile cities, some extending 500 meters beneath mountain ranges, were built specifically to ensure that Iranian retaliatory capability survives even the most intensive bombardment. The dispersed command structures were designed to function even after leadership is eliminated. The regional network of allies was cultivated precisely to ensure that any attack on Iran triggers responses across multiple theaters simultaneously. American planners apparently believed they could destroy Iranian capability with 900 strikes in 12 hours. Iranian planners built a system designed to absorb precisely such an assault and continue fighting indefinitely. The evidence that Iranian preparations have proven effective is visible in the missiles that continue to fly, despite the unprecedented scale of American bombardment. If 900 strikes against 500 targets had achieved their objectives, Iranian launch capability would have been eliminated. Instead, Iran is conducting what it describes as the heaviest offensive operations in the history of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic. This disparity between American expectations and Iranian reality reveals a fundamental intelligence failure. American analysts apparently counted Iranian missiles and launchers visible from satellites. They apparently failed to adequately assess the underground infrastructure that protects Iranian strategic reserves, the dispersed mobile launchers that can operate from concealed positions, and the redundancy built into every aspect of Iranian military planning. The missiles falling on Gulf states today are being launched from facilities that survived the initial assault because Iranian engineers built them to survive exactly this kind of attack. The regional escalation that Iran has triggered represents a strategic masterstroke that American planners seem not to have anticipated. By striking every nation hosting American military installations, Iran has accomplished several objectives simultaneously. It has demonstrated that alignment with the United States carries severe costs, potentially deterring future cooperation with American military operations. It has stretched American defensive capabilities across an enormous perimeter, forcing the defense of multiple countries simultaneously while conducting offensive operations against Iran. It has created pressure on regional governments from populations experiencing bombardment they did not choose and do not support. And it has raised the economic stakes of this conflict by threatening the oil infrastructure and shipping lanes that the global economy depends upon. Each of these effects compounds the others, creating a situation far more complex than the simple military victory Trump apparently envisioned. The Gulf states now finding themselves under Iranian missile attack represent a particularly significant dimension of this escalation. These nations explicitly requested that the United States not launch this war. They understood, better than Washington apparently did, that their geographic proximity to Iran and their hosting of American military installations would make them immediate targets in any conflict. Their concerns were dismissed. Now the Emiratis are warning that they will not tolerate continued missile barrages. The Qataris are watching missiles fall near the base, hosting 10,000 American personnel. The Saudis are hearing explosions in their capital. The coalition that was supposed to support American operations is instead experiencing the costs of those operations in damaged infrastructure, injured civilians, and the terrifying realization that American decisions have made them targets without their consent. The question of whether these regional allies will maintain their support for American operations as costs mount represents one of the key uncertainties that could determine how this conflict evolves. Public statements of solidarity may mask private calculations that American partnership has become too dangerous to sustain. The normalization of relations with Israel that Netanyahu envisions as the reward for destroying Iran may prove impossible when Arab populations have witnessed their cities bombarded as a consequence of that partnership. The Abraham Accords that Trump touts as his greatest diplomatic achievement may collapse under the weight of regional anger at being dragged into a war nobody wanted. Each day that Iranian missiles continue to fall on Gulf states is a day that the foundations of American regional influence erode further. The economic dimensions of this escalation threaten consequences that will affect every American household regardless of their views on Middle Eastern geopolitics. Oil prices have already spiked in response to the conflict, and significant disruption of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz would send them to levels not seen since the 1970s oil crisis. Iran has spent decades developing the capability to close the strait or make its use prohibitively dangerous. Anti-ship missiles, naval mines, small submarines, and fast attack craft employing swarm tactics are positioned throughout the Persian Gulf specifically for this purpose. The Gorey-Jask pipeline that Iran completed allows it to export its own oil through the Gulf of Oman while retaining the capability to disrupt rival shipments. If Iran implements the strait closure that its doctrine has long contemplated, the economic consequences will extend far beyond the Middle East. American consumers will pay at the pump. American businesses will face supply chain disruptions. The inflation that is already straining household budgets will accelerate dramatically. Trump's promises of economic prosperity will collide with the economic warfare he has enabled. The assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, celebrated in Washington and Tel Aviv as a decisive blow against the regime, may prove to have consequences opposite to those intended. Rather than decapitating Iranian leadership and paralyzing decision-making, the killing has transformed Khamenei into a martyr whose memory will inspire resistance for generations. The Islamic Republic was designed with redundancy precisely because its founders understood that external powers would attempt exactly what the United States and Israel have done. Successors were prepared, command structures were established, the government continues to function. Ali Larijani, one of the senior officials who survived the initial assault, has emerged as a key figure in the response. declaring that the United States and the Zionists have burned the heart of the Iranian people, and we will burn their hearts. This is not the language of capitulation. This is the language of a nation united in grief and determined to exact revenge regardless of cost. The religious dimension of this conflict, consistently underestimated by Western analysts, represents a factor that Trump cannot control and may not even understand. Khamenei was not merely a political leader, but a religious authority whose guidance was followed by millions of Shia Muslims worldwide. His assassination during the holy month of Ramadan was experienced not merely as military attack, but as deliberate desecration. The mobs that attempted to storm the American embassy in Baghdad, the crowds that Pakistani forces pushed back, the missiles fired toward Cyprus. These are early manifestations of a religious mobilization that transcends national boundaries and will persist long after any ceasefire is signed. The Shia populations of Iraq, Lebanon, Bahrain, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and communities around the world are processing this conflict not as a distant geopolitical event, but as an attack on their faith community. This religious dimension ensures that the consequences of Trump's decision will extend across generations in ways that purely military analysis cannot capture. The assumption that this war would last only days is collapsing under the weight of evidence that Iranian capability and determination far exceed what American planners expected. Trump himself suggested that operations could conclude in 2 to 3 days, telling Iran he would see them again in 3 years if they rebuilt. This timeline was always fantasy for anyone familiar with Iranian preparations, and the reality is demonstrating just how detached from reality it was. Israeli officials now speak of operations continuing for days or possibly weeks. The Israeli Air Force, despite conducting what it describes as its largest operation in history, has not achieved the air superiority that would enable unopposed bombing. Iranian air defenses, though degraded, continue to function. Iranian missiles continue to launch. The quick and decisive action that Netanyahu promised is instead becoming an open-ended conflict with no clear path to the resolution he envisions. The internal political dynamics within the United States may also constrain Trump's options in ways he did not anticipate. While initial support for military action against Iran exists among portions of the American public, that support is contingent on the promise of quick victory without significant American casualties. If this conflict drags on, if American bases continue to experience missile attacks, if American personnel are killed, if oil prices spike and inflation accelerates, political support will erode. The midterm elections that will determine control of Congress are approaching, and a quagmire in the Middle East is not the backdrop Trump wants for Republican campaigns. The war that was supposed to demonstrate American strength and resolve may instead become a political liability that threatens Republican electoral prospects. The international isolation that this operation has produced represents another factor that constrains American options and benefits Iranian strategy. European allies, while expressing concern about Iranian nuclear activities, have not endorsed military action and have called for de-escalation. China and Russia, Iran's strategic partners, have condemned the assault as a violation of international law. The United Nations Security Council is deadlocked, with vetoes preventing any resolution that would legitimize American actions. The Global South, watching a major power bomb a sovereign nation without meaningful international consequence, is drawing conclusions about the reliability of international law and the nature of American hegemony. Iran, far from being isolated, finds itself with significant international sympathy as the victim of aggression rather than the threat it was portrayed as being. The Syrian corridor that once allowed Iran to supply Hezbollah and Project Influence toward the Mediterranean has been disrupted, but this setback may prove less significant than it initially appeared. Iran's forward defense doctrine has always encompassed multiple theaters and multiple pathways. The weakening of one avenue has coincided with the strengthening of others, including the maritime expansion in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Indian Ocean that Iranian strategists have emphasized in recent years. The Houthi forces in Yemen continue to demonstrate capability to strike targets throughout the Arabian Peninsula and disrupt Red Sea shipping. Iraqi militias maintain capability to strike American bases throughout that country. Even Hezbollah, despite significant degradation, retains thousands of rockets and missiles. The network that Iran built over decades cannot be eliminated through airstrikes against Iranian territory alone. The question that must haunt American planners, if any are thinking clearly amid the fog of war, is what endgame this operation is actually pursuing. If the goal is regime change, history offers no example of air power alone producing such a result against a determined adversary. If the goal is eliminating Iranian nuclear capability, the facilities that matter most are buried too deep to destroy with conventional weapons. If the goal is degrading Iranian military capability, the missiles continuing to fly demonstrate that this goal remains unachieved. If the goal is deterring future Iranian actions, the scale and determination of the current response suggests the opposite effect. Iran is demonstrating that attacks against it will produce devastating regional consequences, strengthening rather than weakening deterrence. Each stated objective of this operation is failing to materialize, while consequences that were supposedly not intended are multiplying. The trap that Trump has walked into is one that Iranian strategists laid decades ago, and it is elegant in its simplicity. Iran understood that it could not match American conventional military power. It therefore built a system designed not to defeat American forces directly, but to make any attack on Iran so costly that rational leaders would choose not to attack. The costs include economic disruption through energy market chaos, diplomatic costs through international isolation, political costs through regional destabilization, military costs through multi-theater warfare, and human costs through casualties that will accumulate as the conflict continues. Trump apparently believed he could impose costs on Iran without experiencing costs in return. This belief was always delusional, and the evidence of its delusion is now visible in every missile falling on American allies, every spike in oil prices, and every international condemnation of American actions. The path forward from this point offers no good options for American policymakers. Escalation, including the threatened force that has never been seen before, risks triggering responses that could include attacks on American territory itself, whether through terrorist operations or through the long-range missiles Iran has been developing. The rhetoric of unlimited violence that Trump has employed may back him into a corner where he feels compelled to take actions that produce catastrophic consequences. What force has never been seen before? Nuclear weapons? The implications of such rhetoric are terrifying to contemplate. De-escalation would require accepting that the initial assault failed to achieve its objectives and that Iran has successfully resisted American power, a humiliation that Trump's personality makes difficult to accept. Continuation of current operations will perpetuate the regional chaos without producing the decisive victory that was promised. Each option carries costs that American planners apparently did not adequately consider before initiating this conflict. The trap has been sprung, and there is no easy exit. The resilience that Iran is demonstrating should not surprise anyone who has studied Iranian history and Iranian strategic culture. This is a civilization that has existed for thousands of years, absorbing invasions and occupations while maintaining its identity and eventually expelling the invaders. This is a nation that fought an 8-year war against Iraq, supported by the United States and armed with chemical weapons, and refused to surrender despite hundreds of thousands of casualties. This is a society that has endured 47 years of American hostility, including sanctions designed to collapse its economy, and has not only survived but developed significant military capabilities despite those efforts. The assumption that 900 strikes in 12 hours would produce capitulation reflected American wishful thinking rather than Iranian reality. The comparison to previous American military adventures is instructive and deeply unflattering to current policymakers. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was accompanied by similar predictions of quick victory, welcomed liberation, and democratic transformation. 20 years later, Iraq remains unstable, and Iranian influence there is greater than ever. The intervention in Libya in 2011 was supposed to be a limited operation that would empower democratic forces. Instead, Libya collapsed into civil war and became a hub for human trafficking and terrorism. Afghanistan, after 20 years of American occupation, fell to the Taliban within weeks of American withdrawal. Each of these cases demonstrates that American military power can destroy but cannot build, can kill leaders but cannot create stable governance, can initiate conflicts but cannot control their trajectories. There is no reason to believe that Iran will prove different, and considerable reason to believe it will prove even more resistant to American designs given its size, population, geographic defensibility, and decades of preparation. The domestic Iranian response to this assault has confounded those who expected the population to rise up against their government and welcome foreign bombs as liberation. The protests that occurred in January and February, cited by American officials as evidence of regime vulnerability, have been completely submerged by national unity in the face of external attack. This pattern is so consistent throughout history that it should have been predicted by any competent analyst. Whatever grievances Iranians may have against their government, they do not welcome foreign bombardment as the solution. The Iranians who protested economic conditions are now sheltering from American bombs and mourning their assassinated leader. The divisions that existed within Iranian society have been replaced, at least temporarily, by solidarity against the attacker. If Trump hoped that Iranian civilians would turn against their government during the assault, that hope has proven as delusional as every other aspect of the planning for this operation. The psychological warfare component of American strategy, including Trump's calls for Iranian military personnel to surrender and his appeals to the population to seize their freedom, reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how nations respond to attack. Populations under bombardment do not typically calculate that their best option is to surrender to those dropping the bombs. They rally to their flag, regardless of their previous political views. They remember who is killing their countrymen and destroying their cities. They develop grievances that persist for generations. The children of Tehran who are experiencing this assault will remember it for the rest of their lives. They will remember where they were when they learned their supreme leader had been murdered. They will remember the terror of missiles and bombs falling on their neighborhoods. And they will form their views of the United States and Israel based on these formative experiences, not on American claims about delivering freedom. The intelligence capabilities that enabled the assassination of Khamenei and his senior leadership, celebrated as a remarkable achievement, may prove to have been a Pyrrhic victory. Yes, the initial decapitation strike succeeded in killing the supreme leader and dozens of top officials, but the Islamic Republic was designed with precisely this scenario in mind. Successors were identified, command structures were established, the government continues to function, and now Iranian intelligence and security services will undertake the largest counterintelligence investigation in their history, hunting for the sources and methods that enabled such precise targeting. The human assets that provided the intelligence enabling this strike may be identified and eliminated. The technological vulnerabilities that were exploited may be closed. The next time Israel or America attempts such an operation, they may find that Iranian security has adapted based on the lessons of this one. I want to hear your thoughts on the situation unfolding in the Middle East. Do you believe Trump understood what he was initiating, or has he walked into a trap that Iranian strategists laid over decades? What happens when the promise of quick victory collides with the reality of prolonged regional conflict? How will American voters respond when the costs of this war become visible in their daily lives? Drop your comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand that the confident assertions of victory emerging from Washington are colliding with a reality that refuses to cooperate. The role of Russia and China in this evolving situation adds another layer of complexity that constrains American options. Both nations have strategic partnerships with Iran that include military cooperation, technology transfer, and economic relationships that help Iran evade sanctions. Russia has reportedly contracted to supply advanced air defense systems to Iran in the aftermath of the June 2025 war. China has provided materials essential for missile production. Neither nation will accept American dominance over a region that contains such a significant portion of global energy reserves. The possibility that this conflict could draw in major powers, directly or indirectly, represents a risk that American planners seem not to have adequately weighed. Iran is not alone in the world, and the coalition arrayed against it is not as unified as Washington claims. The Strait of Hormuz remains the ultimate wildcard in this conflict, representing Iranian leverage that could transform regional war into global economic crisis. Iran has spent decades developing the capability to close or severely disrupt traffic through the strait. Naval mines that can be deployed quickly and are difficult to clear. Small submarines operating in confined waters where their limitations matter less. Fast attack craft employing swarm tactics against larger vessels. Anti-ship missiles capable of striking any vessel within range. The Goraj pipeline allows Iran to continue its own exports while disrupting the exports of rivals. If Iran calculates that it faces existential threat regardless of its actions, the incentive to impose maximum costs on its attackers grows correspondingly. A closed or contested Strait of Hormuz would send oil prices to levels that would trigger global recession, affecting every economy on Earth and imposing costs on American consumers that would rapidly erode support for this war. I'm Michael Harris. The war that was supposed to demonstrate American power and resolve is instead demonstrating the limits of both, as Iran's massive response threatens to slip entirely out of Trump's control. The missiles continue to fly. The regional allies continue to suffer. The economic consequences continue to mount. And the quick victory that was promised recedes further with each passing hour. This is not the script that American planners wrote, but it may be the script that Iranian planners wrote decades ago, waiting patiently for the moment when American hubris would deliver exactly the confrontation they had prepared for. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and understand that the consequences of this week's decisions will shape the Middle East for generations to come. I'll see you in the next video.